Hello, everybody. We're just going to review the information from yesterday with the bell ringer. Okay, I'm going to have this posted here for you, as you can see right now. And we're going to talk a little bit today about progressive movement in the early 1900s, late 1800s with women. Okay, and I'll have a short assignment for you to work on. It's just going to be a few questions about the women's activist movements during this progressive era. And then I will have another assignment for you. I know what you're thinking. It's going to be a lot, but in all reality, it's not too much. Okay. So I'm going to have this posted for you. It's famous muckrakers of the progressive era. Okay. And with that being said, you'll be able to utilize that to your advantage. And then I have a presentation I like you do. I usually do it every year. It's just the famous muckraker. You're going to act like a muckraker, a journalist, and talk about some of the things that maybe we can improve at UDAHS. So I'll have that posted here shortly. You'll see that in the assignments, the modules, right, for chapter 1, progressive era, okay, attached shortly. So anyway, Bellringer, describe what a muckraker is. How did muckrakers present grievances in American society? Detail who Jacob Riis and Upton Sinclair were, and what were their famous works. So I'll give you some time if you want to pause the video to write down your response, and I'm going to review it here shortly. Okay, so a muckraker is a journalist, a person during this progressive time period. Obviously, they're educated, so they had the ability to write out some of the scenarios, the issues, the problems, the conflicts in American society. So these muckrakers were mostly journalists, maybe illustrators, maybe they created pictures, political cartoons, or maybe they actually, took actual pictures of the events, the overcrowding in society. And a muckraker was just trying to pull and bring to the attention of the people and politicians and public officials of the issues, the concerns, the problems that were happening in society. Okay, so in all reality, they were trying to bring these issues, these problems to the attention of public officials, of people to gather and come together to fight for social justice, for betterment of people in society. And because this Gilded Age brought so much innovation, so much advancement, it also brought on a lot of concerns, and which we talked about with low wages, okay, overworking, okay, poor working conditions, you name it. There's so many of them. And these muckrakers just wanted to talk about it, wanted to bring to the attention of the people what's going on. All right, so real quick, Jacob Riis, his famous work was How the Other Half Lives. And his goal with his work was to take pictures of New York City, okay, going around these, okay, larger, obviously urban areas, these cities, and Jacob Riis in particular, New York City, taking pictures of how people lived in these jam-packed living conditions. Okay, I know I mentioned it before. Let's say there'd be 15, 20 people in the size of my classroom. It was unfortunate. It was unbelievable. But for the most part, that's what people could afford. That's it. These shelters didn't have running water, electricity, insulation. So many people froze. Many people didn't have the ability to afford food. Many people lived in these disgusting, unfair living conditions. And Jacob Riis wanted to bring that to the attention of the people. And he was posting a lot of these pictures in newspapers, magazines, for people to see how they actually lived. And I know I talked about that yesterday. Upton Sinclair, his famous work, The Jungle. So he wrote a book about the disgusting, the unsafe, the unsanitary conditions in the meatpacking industry at that time period. So people literally dying in these unsafe working conditions, working very long hours, very timely hours. That time, they didn't really have that many refrigerators to keep meat preserved. So obviously meat in the summer months, especially in the heat, would spoil, attract rodents. And way to get rid of those rodents, well, throw some rat poisoning down. Okay, after these rodents would eat the rat poisoning, they'd probably burrow into the meat and most likely die, right? And obviously waste, okay, their feces would be in that meat. So these workers would package the meat, sell it at the restaurants, at the grocery stores, not thinking anything of it. And there were no guidelines. There were no rules of the management and treatment of this food and these different types of supplies. So they're getting away with it, and no one really could stop them. Many people got sick over this, clearly. Many people died, and there were no protections for the consumer. There were no labels on meats, on different types of food products, nothing. Medication, no label whatsoever. So people had no idea what they're going to be consuming. And Upton Sinclair wanted to bring that to the attention of the people in his book, The Jungle. So you guys already read that, right? You guys obviously know a little bit about The Jungle. I'm going to grade that for you here soon. And like I said, it's hard to read in some cases. All right, so vocab terms for today. I'll post these up for you right now. So we have, I know there's quite a bit, but this was from the other day when I didn't have them posted. But we have Muckraker, Jacob Riis, Upton Sinclair, The Jungle. Today we're going to talk about women rights movement, suffrage, WTUL, Susan B. Anthony, and 19th Amendment. So I'll let you guys write that down, pause the video. I'm just going to keep moving for time's sake, but pause the video, write down the definition, okay? And when we reconvene, we'll discuss it. We'll go over it. But I want to make sure you have those vocab terms. They're very important for the assessment quiz, right? Moving forward. So there you go. Those are those terms. You can pause that video, like I said. Okay, real quick, I want to go over women's movements, women's activist movements during this progressive era. So we already talked about Jacob Riis, Upton Sinclair. So progressive era and women's rights. So women before the progressive era, mostly confined to the household. They're uneducated, didn't have an opportunity for the workplace, for education, academics, nothing. No right to vote, no say in government. It was very unfortunate. So these women, for the most part, really took care of the household. And at that time, it was actually kind of amazing the roles that they actually had. So obviously taking care of the children while the men were at work, supplying for food, okay, preparing the food for the men while they're at work. And with no education, it was their job to educate the children, do their best with reading, writing, okay, skills of speech with the children. And they literally had to teach themselves how to read, how to write, how to present, how to talk, and form sentences. And again, a lot of it had to do with religion, so based off of the Bible. But for the most part, it was really all on the women to perform all of these tasks, these objectives. And before the progressive era, not many opportunities whatsoever. Okay, so after the progressive era, women took paying jobs, so had an opportunity in the workplace. For the most part, they were secretaries, librarians, school teachers, nothing really labor intensive, but for the most part, they were doing their part and having the opportunity to work into these locations. Found a place in the community. So social groups forming for these women. When we get to the 1920s, we'll talk about flappers, okay, and how there's these new forms of entertainment and new advancements, okay, to help benefit these women to have more opportunities in society. And again, one of the biggest things in the 19th Amendment, which we'll talk about soon. So road to equality. I'm just going to go through this real quick. There's many unions forming. So a union is a group of people that come together that have, obviously the same problems, let's say conflicts, issues, and they want to solve something, right? They want to fight for social justice. They want to fight for, let's say, an advantage, right? So in 1890, something interesting, Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania, so located towards Philadelphia, says let them learn, meaning women had the right to an education in southeast Pennsylvania. And this was really the first of its kind. The WTL, Women's Trade Union League, founded by Florence Kelley. And they want to try to set the minimum wage, 8-hour workday, and make it safer for women in the workplace. And Florence Kelly was very influential. I know I mentioned her in the pretest. She was an activist trying to push for more opportunities for women in American society. All right, we'll get to this more when we get to the 1920s, but the 18th Amendment passed, meaning it outlaws alcohol in the United States. And one of the biggest reasons was because women were mistreated at home. The men would obviously make that wage in the industry, in the factory, working all these long hours, and they wanted to unwind. And where they unwind at? Not at home, but the bar, right? At the saloon, drinking up their sorrows and a lot of their issues that they face in the workplace. So when they come home, they didn't have any money to support the family. It was all spent on alcohol. And we all know maybe some of the physical altercations, some abuse that may have been happening, was occurring in the households. And the best way to fight that, women's temperance or women's Christian temperance union. And this was a group of women that came together with religious core values to fight against alcohol, really, the consumption of the sale of it, and to make sure that these traditional values are seen in the household, that religion is taking a priority in people's lives. And again, we'll talk about this fundamentalist versus modernist idea when we get to the 1920s. All right, so what the women really wanted was the right to vote, have say in government, okay, have an opportunity to obviously have a say in what goes on, and vote for elected officials, representatives, to fight for their cause, for more opportunities. Okay, so here's some examples. It's just like a map showing women's suffrage. And as you can see in these more urban areas in the United States during this time period, mostly on the East Coast, there is no voting for women, right? Many of these places, okay, like New York City, like Philadelphia, I know, like I mentioned, the opportunity for education, but at the time, not a right to vote. But in 1915, still, right, World War I was occurring. It was right at the beginning of it. The United States didn't get involved just yet. But on the East Coast, where there's bigger populations, more people, they didn't really have the right to vote for women at this time. As you move out west, right, religion plays a stronger role in people's lives. Okay, manifest destiny, right? I know, yeah, I know Mr. Henninger probably mentioned that and talked about that quite a bit. But as these settlements are occurring out in the frontier, religion takes a more priority and a little bit more open for women's opportunities and right say in government, right? All right, so moving on here, women's suffrage, plain and simple, means the right to vote. So Susan B. Anthony, that's another historical activist. Okay, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they're trying to push for their best for women's opportunity and advancement in society, right to vote, education, work. All right, so real quick, the 19th Amendment, okay, a lot of this activist movements, okay, a lot of these unions that were forming and marching on to public institutions, public facilities, let's say like Capitol buildings, trying to promote women's opportunities and right to vote. Okay, finally, this activist movements were pushing and really advancing. And we'll see women's right to vote after World War One. Okay, it really took World War One and women stepping up in society as the men were fighting overseas to see this advancement, to see these opportunities being granted to the people. So the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote, okay, women's suffrage. And like I mentioned, even after all these movements, even after all this activist movements and protests in front of peaceful protests in front of public institutions and facilities, we don't really see these opportunities, and we don't see women's suffrage actually until after World War One, when women stepped up and helped on the battlefield, right? For the most part, being nurses, the Red Cross forming, helping these individuals, these soldiers coming home with his psychological effects, with medical conditions, right? To help benefit them and get them back into the working force, back to or return back to normalcy. Okay, because of women's support, women's role in society, the 19th Amendment comes about again right after World War One. Did all these movements, these activist movements and unions that were formed help? Of course it did. But again, World War One kind of got the ball rolling for women's opportunities. All right, so that is what I have for the presentation. Please check the assignments. You'll see you'll see an activity that I'd like you to complete. It's just a short reading about women's suffrage and a couple questions I'd like you to answer. All right, that's all I have. You guys take care. Hope you're doing well. If I can get this going, there we go.